Next day, Pete Conrad and Alan Bean entered the lunar module, leaving Dick Gordon in the command module.
Hey, I'll tell you what we're parked next to. Yeah. We're about 25 feet in front of the surveyor crater. That's good. That's where we want it to be. I bet you when I get down to the bottom of the ladder, I can see the surveyor. Okay. Down to the pad. Okay. Man, that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me. Oh, you'll never believe it. That's what I see sitting on the side of the crater.
Now, Pete Conrad collected a preliminary geological sample.
Notice the length of his shadow is more than 3 times his length at this point.
But I can walk quite well. Seems a little weird, I'll tell you.
Now, Al Bean left Intrepid to join Conrad on the surface of the moon.
Good shape. Yeah, pull the hatch closed here. Okay. Don't block it.
How did they get this kind of lighting on the dark side of the LEM with no atmosphere?
The river cone over there. And for about almost 2 hours now. That's at least 30 minutes up there. It's going to take longer than I expected.
How does the sun have rays with no atmosphere and perfect seeming in each photo?
5 miles above the moon, Dave Scott and Jim Irwin looked out the window of their lunar module down toward Al Warden in the command module, which had completed its separation maneuver. Beneath them, the 15,000-foot peaks of the lunar Apennine Mountains. Soon they would fly low over those peaks on their way to a landing in a little valley in the mountains of the moon.
Coming up on pitch over. P64. Okay. Nav LPD. LPD. Coming right.
Out their window, they could see the sinuous meanderings of the lunar canyon known as Hadley Rill as they brought their lunar module, call sign Falcon, toward its landing, and the beginning of what would be one of the most significant chapters in the history of scientific exploration.
Here they're moving horizontally along the ground in very precision, slow motion. The 10,000-pound thrust rocket below them is holding them up from falling because they weigh many tons. And the top thrusters have to push them. Those rockets, those top thrusters should have been on the bottom, pushing that mass. But they're not. That's a very big question in the development of the LEM. I want to see how they figured the top rockets wouldn't have tipped this over. And now they stopped it. So precision, and it's coming down. And you can see this pudding effect of the moon's surface. And you see these light rays starting to come. But they're not dust because they don't cover anything. You can still see the pudding underneath. It isn't covering, and it isn't coming from the rocket center, which is in the center of your picture. It's coming somehow from the front, and nothing gets covered up. And there's no corona of dust thrown out here from the rocket, and there's no fuel.
Is on the plane ahead. I can see Pluton and Icarus.
As Scott stood describing the craters and mountains, we on Earth perhaps did not yet realize the scope and extent of the coming mission. Aboard the lunar module was a small dune buggy-like car called the Lunar Roving Vehicle, or just plain rover. The astronauts would travel miles in collecting samples and placing and conducting experiments.
There are no sharp, jagged peaks. There are no large boulders apparent anywhere.
The journey of Apollo 15 had begun 4 days earlier, July 26, 1971. The crew, Dave Scott, spacecraft commander and veteran of Gemini 8 and Apollo 9. Jim Irwin, lunar module pilot, who would explore Hadley Rill and the Apennine front with Scott. Al Warden, command module pilot, who would remain in lunar orbit operating an extensive array of cameras and experiments and making observations.
Hello, Houston. The Endeavor is on station with cargo, and what a fantastic sight. Oh, this is really profound. I'll tell you, this is absolutely mind-boggling up here.
Gentlemen, I can well imagine that a foreign planet must be a weird thing to see.
Their first job was to get
Watch them take the rover out of here and see those wheels flop. That would have probably broken them.
Coming down okay?
All the photo or video of this is fuzzy and obscured. It's all we have of NASA trying to show this rover coming out of the side of the LEM, and for sure it was not folded on a 90-degree angle.
Like soft powder snow.
Next, the astronauts tried out the rover. During this test drive, one failure showed up. The rover was designed to steer through both its front and rear wheels.
I don't have any front steering, Joe. Like this rear steering, Dave. Yeah.
In use, the absence of front wheel steering would hardly be noticed. Then they loaded the equipment they would need for their geological survey and boarded the rover for their first exploration.
Okay, we're moving forward, Joe.
Roger.
They were headed toward St. George Crater, located on a mountain slope above Hadley Rill to the south of the landing site.
Hang on. Man, this is really a rock and rolling ride, isn't it?
There would be a stop to collect samples at a smaller crater called Elbow. They would also drive core tubes into the lunar soil to collect contiguous specimens from beneath the surface. But now it was time to return to the lunar module. Not to end this first work period.
They're traveling, and notice this mountain in the upper right, and notice the sun is coming from the right. You may have to reverse your video a couple times to see this, but you're going to see this exact same landscape again. And the sun will be coming from the right when you see this landscape again, but they'll be going back the other direction. This is their only demonstration that gravity is 1/6, and it fails miserably. Watch this.
Spectacular demonstration. Oh, well. Remember that. Lovely.
They should have thrown a ball in the air, and it should have gone up 60 feet. Why didn't they do that?
We drive up sun here, and I can see Mount Hadley, and the linear patterns in it are really remarkable.
Then they began the physical sampling of the Apennine front, stopping at 4 craters in their traverse.
Oh, boy. It's a nice little crater, isn't it? It sure is. Okay, Jimmy, let's go to work. Roger. Look at that. Almost see twinning in there. Guess what we just found? I think we found what we came for. Crystal and rock, huh? Yes, sir. You better believe it. 196, a special bag.
Yes, sir.
Joe, this crater is a gold mine.
And there might be diamonds in the next one.
Yeah, babe.
Collection bag, probably before you go much longer. It's coming very loose there.
Okay. Coming very loose. Let me do it right now, Joe. So we don't forget it.
Roger, we sure don't want to lose that one.
I don't know what we'd do without you, Joe.
Now their day is over, and they're traveling home, but the sun is still coming from the right, and the mountains are still exactly the same as they were. This appears to be a stage set, somewhat like a movie, a cowboy movie, where the horse is moving and the background is different. It happens on all the rover trips.
Making me seasick.
What do you expect traveling on the Mari?
Oh, what a big mountain that Hadley is. Yeah, it's beautiful. Sun is really fierce. Oh, look at the mountains today, Jim, when they're all sunlit. Isn't that beautiful? It really is. By golly, that's just super. You know, unreal. reminded of a favorite biblical passage from Psalm. I look unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. But of course, we get quite a bit from Houston, too.
This appears to be high noon on the moon, 250 degrees in the sun. They should have cooked and baked inside that limb. And Eastman Kodak told me that film melts at 150 degrees. None of the film taken on the moon at this type of temperature should have survived. It should have been crisp like in an oven and curled and melted.
171 hours and 37 minutes after they had lifted off the planet Earth, Scott and Irwin would lift off its sister planet, accompanied by a musical salute they themselves would provide from a small tape recorder on board.
Good liftoff, automatic.
April 16, 1972. Apollo 16, man's fifth lunar landing, sat silently on the pad awaiting its mission. Inside the astronaut quarters, its relaxed crew ate Sunday breakfast. John Young, the veteran of 3 previous space flights, was commander. Ken Mattingly, command module pilot, would conduct orbital experiments around the moon, while Charles Duke explored the lunar surface with Young. April 22nd. Young and Duke would find themselves strapped into a small electric car called the Rover, bouncing across the lunar plateau known as Descartes.
The old water bag is working super. This is going to be a good day, Charlie. Yow! Woo! Man, that's a great. Big skid. We're doing 10 clicks, Tony. Covered me with dust on that one.
As Young and Duke rode the bucking rover to the lunar formation called Stone Mountain, NASA geologist Farouk El-Baz wrote on a blackboard on Earth, "There is nothing so far removed from us to be beyond our reach, or so hidden that we cannot discover it." René Descartes. As John Young would later remark, Apollo 16 would certainly help prove that René Descartes was right.
Compacted. Almost like a freshly plowed field that's been rained on.
The subsequent maneuvers all went without a hitch. Then the next day, April 20th, Young and Duke undocked the lunar module preparatory to landing, leaving Mattingly in the command module.
Okay, Jim, it was a little rush, but we got it done. Right here, 5 by Jim, and we're sailing free. 1, stand by 1, Jim. Okay, we're on time.
The next maneuver was for Mattingly to burn the main engine of his spacecraft to put it into a circular orbit. The first step.
The Earth is 4 times larger than the moon, and yet in this shot you see that it looks even smaller than the moon. That would be impossible.
Close enough together to dock, if necessary.
Here they are landing, and you can see the pudding effect of the soil, and now you see those strange, what I call special effects light rays. If that were really sand, it would be covering up all of that, which is beneath it, but it doesn't fill in holes, doesn't cover mounds, and it looks like light rays photographed underwater, not dust being shot away at a 10,000-pound thrust rocket engine. And you can see here, nothing gets covered up, nothing changes when it lands. There it is.
The original plan had called for Young and Duke to get out and explore shortly after landing. However, the near abort had lasted 6 hours. The tired astronauts would sleep. April 21. Mission Commander John Young stepped onto the Descartes formation.